Alright, we got ourselves another MovieMan double feature review. You're welcome, Shimamoto. Totally only doing this because I actually saw these films as a double feature on the day in question back to back. Totally not because I'm behind on movie reviews. Definitely not. But first up, what happens when the Coens don't do a film together? Well, you have yourself a film that's good in some ways and not great in others.
Who are you?
Democrats.
Wow, you've had a full day.
So first up we have Drive Away Dolls, directed by Ethan Coen, not Ethan and Joel Coen. I know that name sounds familiar because there's a lot of very good films that exist out there that are by the Coens, the Coen brothers, such as No Country for Old Men, or other ones such as Fargo. That's just to name two. The Coens have done a lot of very good, usually dark, funny, usually critically acclaimed films. I assume they still make films together, but they've also split and kind of make films on their own. The guy that didn't direct this, Joel, he's gone off, and I think the only film he's directed solo was The Tragedy of Macbeth, a more modern adaptation. Our current guy who directed Drive Away Dolls, Ethan Coen, who the only other film he's done solo directing was Trouble in the Mind, which was a documentary that I heard about recently, but I think that technically came out in 2022. There's a decently sized cast and kind of a who's who of little ancillary characters, but we'll focus on our two main leads. Margaret Qualley. Most recently, she was Felicity in Poor Things. She nailed it. She was great. She was also, you might recognize her as Pussycat from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And this is a super deep cut, but I looked into it, and I would not have guessed this in a million years. She is the voice of Mama, who is the sister of Lockney in the video game Death Stranding, which I love, can't wait for the sequel. And then our secondary protagonist, again, I'm surprised I didn't recognize her, though I guess I didn't watch, it's been years since I watched the movie that I do know her from. We have Geraldine Viswanathan, who she's been acting for a little while, but back in 2020, I reviewed The Broken Hearts Gallery. She was great in this one. And it's a solid romantic comedy. It's a predictable rom-com. It also has Dacre Montgomery, but they're great together. And fun fact, she is the recurring character, Tawny in BoJack Horseman's. Premise, two gals are gonna go on a cross-country road trip, and they use a system that I don't know if it's actually real. I've never even heard of it before. You go to a place where they already need a car delivered to, and then you just take on the liability of driving it there. It's a drive away. Basically, you're doing the work for the company, but what these two gals don't know is that in the trunk of this car is a sought-after briefcase. And then our movie unfolds. That's it. It's the comedy of two gals that their relationship is slowly becoming a will they won't they type of deal, combined with some criminals that are trying to get their hands in the case and find these two gals, and that's the whole film. Admittedly, it's a fun movie, borderline dumb fun. Most of the comedy works in this film for me. Definitely some cheap laughs here and there, but most of the comedy works for me. And the editing in this film, the editing style, it's definitely not what you'd see in most larger Hollywood releases. It's a little bit quirky, adds a fun additional visual layer and an aesthetic to the film. There's definitely some very purposefully trippy 70s drug trip sequences as well. There's some Adult Swim after hours commercial interlude vibes you definitely would get from this film. I think it works most of the time. Sometimes it's a little bit much. Characters are all fun, unique, and varied. Whether it's our main protagonists or two characters that are driving the plot, they're very likable. I liked both the characters and I was rooting for them, and once romance picks up, I was rooting for it. They were a cute couple. They're very yin and yang to each other. And the villains were, Coleman Domingo is great in whatever he does, and the other two, basically Horace and Jasper over here, but everybody served their purpose. They were all fun and entertaining. And again, it can dip into that dumb fun territory. Go in as blind as possible. The trailer does not even begin to unearth the twists this movie has to offer. Let me just put it this way, you're in for some long and hard surprises. Some people might call the narrative decisions and twists to be stupid, fun, or inappropriate, but you know what? I think they made the film stand out from the other films that are out there, and the romance angle was fun and kinky. I definitely shipped the two of them as a couple. There was definitely some kinky action. It's not porn, but you know, we're getting close. But the film has its flaws, right? So this is just a theory. I don't know if this is to be substantiated by anything, but when the Coens work together, as far as I can tell, it's this golden pairing, and it's this perfect pairing of very dark, serious themes and story.
Fucking imbeciles!
Combined with some moments of like dark comedy or maybe comedic levity.
Well, what does this guy look like, anyways?
Oh, he's a little guy, kind of funny looking.
Uh-huh. In what way?
Oh, just in a general kind of way.
But my point is, notice how when the brothers split, Joel goes off and does a very serious movie, Tragedy of Macbeth, and it's well received. Ethan breaks off, does this movie, and it's much goofier, and there's some serious moments and stuff, and, you know, violence and torture that happens in it, and romance, of course, but, like, it still feels a lot, like, more freewheeling, a lot goofier, like, it feels a lot less serious. So my theory is that these two brothers work together and, like, balance each other out and like temper each other when they make films, but again, that's just a theory. Cons of the film: I kind of wish it was more serious, maybe even more violent. It's fine, you don't have to have violence. I talk about this all the time. I just think violence accentuates and like punches harder. I do kind of wish it was like it was taken a bit more seriously, because a lot of this film is a comedy, sure, overall, but then it tries to inject moments of like someone being tortured and killed, or someone about to be potentially murdered, or some very serious moments. I don't know. I thought there'd be more of a balance there, but the film leans more heavily into comedy, and I think the film kind of suffers for doing so. The edits, although I did mention earlier as a pro that visually they add a unique aesthetic to the film, I do at the same time think they can be a bit jarring. It's a bit much sometimes. It feels kind of like late night Adult Swim. I stand by that. The movie just kind of came and went. Like it's not sticking with me. It's a little bit too goofy. If it took itself a bit more seriously, or if it was just written perhaps a bit more seriously, I think there's a reason that the Coens work best when they're working together on things. As it stands, is Drive Away Dolls a bad movie? No, I'd say it's definitely a really good movie. It's more than above average. I think it's entertaining, it's kind of kinky, but it's also romantic, it's funny, it's, you know, a little bit violent, it's a good time, it's still worth a watch. Maybe like a stream and dinner date night movie or something. All that being said, I would still give Drive Away Dolls a low 4 out of 5. I give it a low 4 out of 5. It's really good, give it a watch, worth your time, but it doesn't quite measure up to the same snuff that the other works of the Coens do when they're together. But now, let's get dark. You ever heard of the old expression about artists putting a little bit of themselves into their work?
Do you want to hear the next bit of the story?
I want to go. I want to go. What happens when it takes on a life of its own?
And up next we have Stopmotion. Now this one understandably flew under, I think, a lot of people's radars. I'm honestly quite surprised I got to see it in a theater at all. But this is actually one of those films that's a Shudder original, I think. And for those of you that don't know, Shudder is like a streaming service. Think of Netflix, but for horror, basically. Directed by a Robert Morgan. So I'm unfamiliar with this man's body of work, but when looking into it, I found out this, in terms of full-length feature film, is Mr. Morgan's directorial debut. Funny enough, this is a horror movie heavily involved in stop motion animation. Stop motion, you take pictures of something one frame at a time, then you can run it back, and it's like it's moving on its own.
My nose! It keeps giving us away!
As a guy who loves practical effects and effects in movies, back in the day, it was one of the only feasible applications for visual effects, and it looks great, it looks real, and if done properly, it's just, I don't know, I love it. Stands the test of time if it's done well, in my opinion. But this director has been making short films since 1997. Most of them have to do with stop motion, and it's funny enough, it's a bunch of very dirty, grimy, like, it looks cool, but it's like also like some definitely some disturbing imagery for sure. I don't know if you've heard of ABCs of Death. Long story short, anthology horror series, 26 letters of the alphabet. Each letter is given to a director. In the ABCs of Death 2, specifically the sequel, he did D is for Deloused, and it was a very horrific little stop-motion animation. Which, if you don't know, that's what the whole film is about. Because our star, Aisling Franciosi, I believe.
Aisling Franciosi.
That's what it tells me. Aisling Franciosi. She's an Irish actress, right? But I found out she was in a couple things that I liked. Last Voyage of the Demeter last year, she was Anna the Stowaway in that, so she had some experience in horror. And she was also Lyanna Stark in Game of Thrones, so she has some experience in medieval fantasy horror in a way. But basically, her character plays the daughter of a woman that's a renowned stop-motion animator. But mom has a medical situation crop up, and the daughter is left in the middle of the project that her mom was working on. She tries her hand at it and can't quite grasp it, but then all of a sudden she meets this little girl, and then between the little girl and her own mind and imagination, this apartment she temporarily moves into, she gets inspired to basically make her own stop-motion film. But as the movie progresses, and as the trailer suggests, as things go on, perhaps she's losing her grip on certain things, and these stop-motion creations seem to adopt a life of their own, and then, creepy stop-motion hijinks ensue. So pros as always, I'll start with the very obvious one. If you know me, you know I love one thing. Show me practical effects. Yes, as always, practical effects. And there's stop motion used heavily in this film. It is a pivotal narrative element, so obviously I love the practicality involved with the stop motion used in this movie. Duh. It looks great. You can tell that the man who made this definitely has some experience with it, and the fact that he was able to seamlessly merge that with this live action movie, the setups that he has for it, the hardware and the props and all that, it's all like accurate. It's what somebody who was actually going to make a stop motion film would use. So I love the attention to detail there, and clearly the knowledge used to implement that into the film. It was great. There are kills in this film. There's one that's, I think, thematically, it's a fun little creative kill. I'll leave it at that. But there is a fun creative kill in this if we're on the subject of practical effects. From a narrative premise, I like the concept because it's like the whole struggling artist narrative. And ever since I read Stephen King's Pet Sematary years ago, and I do love the narrative premise of an individual slowly losing their mind or losing grip on reality and seeing how that affects them in their environment. So we get that narrative element as well, and that kind of makes for an intriguing premise where you're trying to figure out the difference between like reality and what's in the character's head and exactly where their headspace is even at, and it keeps you guessing as to, well, how the hell is this story going to go and where are we going to find ourselves at the end of it. Admittedly, the theater I went to it's the worst one in the area, but it's the only one I could go to that was showing this movie. It was the smallest one they had, the oldest one they had, with the shittiest seats they had. The speakers weren't working properly, so the audio was quiet, like quieter than I could tell that it was supposed to be. And Dune Part 2 was playing next door, and that was like blare. It's just, that one the speakers were working just fine. Good thing Dune 2's music is great, because the quieter moments you just hear like, and at one point toward the end of our movie, I swear to God, I could hear Chalamet go, "That's not hope!" The experience wasn't quite what it could be. I kind of want to revisit this film on Shudder and see how the full unaffected experience is supposed to be. That being said, the acting seemed fine. Decent. I don't know, like our main lead, she was good, if not sometimes a tiny bit stiff. And I guess I can't blame the actress if the decisions that she's making are getting progressively worse or more like spontaneous, or when you're losing your mind, you don't want other people to know you're losing your mind. Big pet peeve of mine in movies. Smile did that to a certain degree. I mean, the mom was a little bit and then like the boyfriend was kind of I think the other characters were fine. The little girl was creepy and good enough. All the actors in this, I think, are like good enough for the most part. And our lead is probably the best one of them all. There's the old adage of artists putting themselves into their work is definitely very prevalent in this movie, both metaphorically and to an extent physically. So I did like that approach to it. You see horror movies explore artistic creative processes all the time in darker ways, like writer's block or what have you. And this movie, she kind of has the same thing going on. She feels constrained by her mother, and so it also tackles generational trauma, and she's trying to get her own creative ideas, but I think that she's been stifled for so long, and she's been in her mom's shadow for so long, that it's not that those ideas aren't in there or can't come from her. She's not used to having the voice, really. She's not used to being able to have her own ideas. The more I think about it, the more I appreciate how that was tackled in the narrative and from a writing perspective. Similar to Drive Away Dolls, this film was good. I would definitely watch it. I would say it's very good, with some like little moments of maybe fantastic. It's a very, very good film, but it suffers from pacing for sure. Scenes that overstay their welcome, there's sequences that kind of go a little bit too long. It takes a while to get going, and it takes a while to you get the premise all set up, and by the time the creeps start happening, I think we're already like midway through Act 2, which kind of is like the halfway point in the film. And I suppose my only other complaint really was that I wanted more of the horror. There are still quite a few horror elements in the movie, but I wanted more. It's a symptom of some movies these days that are good, but aren't like, I don't know if that means like longer or like maybe chunkier in how they were written. It's good foundation, pretty good execution overall, but I just wanted more from it. So maybe I'm just getting a little bit too greedy. Here's the funny part. End of the day, I would give Stop Motion honestly the same rating that I gave Drive Away Dolls. Is that I would say it sits at a low 4 out of 5 for me. A low 4 out of 5 for sure. I'm glad I watched them back to back. Both are very good movies in their own right. I was not disappointed. I recommend both. If you're not a fan of horror, I get it. You can skip Stop Motion. But if you're an artist who is into the darker sides of humanity, and you want to see an artist struggle with like generational trauma and trying to make creative projects, and then you have horror elements in there and really well done, cool stop motion animation work, then by all means check it out. That's all I gotta say about those two. We're slowly getting caught up on movies, but thank you guys and gals so much for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode or whatever movie review I do next. And goodbye, travelers.